The sun was a harsh overseer that morning, rising over the far mesas and flooding the dry plains with light sharp enough to cut. Heat shimmered off the sand and sage, and the air itself smelled of dust, horses, and the faint trace of gun oil. Ethan McGraw leaned against the worn hitching post outside the stage stop, one hand resting on his hat brim, the other hooked on the leather belt that carried his Colt. He was a tall man, broad through the shoulders from years of hauling fence rails and breaking Mustangs. His face carried the weather of the frontier, lined from wind, scarred from fights long past, yet with eyes still sharp as a hawk's. He'd been waiting for this day for months. The letter had come from St. Louis in the spring, sealed with a neat flowery hand. The woman who wrote it, Miss Clara Whitfield, was a schoolteacher, or had been, until her brother passed and the little inheritance she'd leaned on disappeared. The letter spoke plainly of loneliness, of a wish for a new start, of a willingness to marry a man she'd never met in exchange for security on the frontier. Ethan was no fool. He knew plenty of men ordered brides and ended up with nothing but disappointment, but loneliness had gnawed at him harder than winter blizzards, harder than dry summers that killed cattle by the dozens. A ranch was no place for one man to run alone, so he'd written back. And now, today, the stage was due. The coach came into sight first as a dust cloud on the horizon. The steady thunder of hooves carried on the wind, and soon the red and yellow Concorde rattled into the station yard, iron tires squealing over packed dirt. Whip cracks echoed as the driver brought the team to a halt, and the hot, sweating horses tossed their heads with relief. Ethan stood straighter, a flicker of something strange in his chest. Hope, nerves, maybe both. The first passenger stepped down, a traveling salesman in a bowler hat, brushing dust from his shiny shoes with an embroidered handkerchief. The second was a woman in a pale bonnet, clutching a sleeping infant. A miner followed, then a pair of ranch hands heading back south, and then, the last figure climbed down slowly, careful to place one worn boot after another on the iron step. She wasn't the slender young teacher Ethan had been picturing from the letters. She was older, maybe in her early 30s, with dark hair tucked under a plain bonnet, a sturdy frame hidden in a faded calico dress. Lines of hardship lived around her eyes, and with her came 5 children. They tumbled off after her, 2 boys with hand-me-down boots too big for their feet, twin girls in patched dresses, and a toddler clinging stubbornly to her skirts. Dusty, wide-eyed, thin. The yard went quiet as every ranch hand, drifter, and stage passenger turned to stare. The woman straightened her back, gathered the little ones close, and fixed her gaze on Ethan. "You McGraw?" she asked, voice firm despite the exhaustion in it. Ethan blinked, his mouth going dry. She gave a nod. "Name's Sarah Carter. My husband died last winter. Wasn't no work left for me in Missouri, not with mouths to feed. So I answered your ad." For a long second the world seemed to hang still. The desert wind whispered over the yard. A crow called from the telegraph pole. This was not what Ethan McGraw had planned. The weight of choices inside the small stage stop cafe. Sarah sat across from Ethan at a rough wooden table. Her children crowded around her like ducklings around a hen. A plate of biscuits, already half devoured, sat in front of them. Ethan hadn't said much since bringing them inside. He just stared, as though the words had all been driven out of him. "I'm sorry if this ain't what you expected," Sarah said finally, breaking the silence. Her hands were steady as she poured milk into tin cups for the twins, but there was a softness in her eyes, like someone braced for rejection. Ethan leaned back, arms crossed over his chest. "You weren't the one writing those letters." She shook her head. "My sister-in-law. She passed on the road here. Fever took her in Dodge. Before she went, she pressed your letters into my hand. Said you were a decent man. Said maybe." Her voice caught, but she cleared her throat. "Maybe you'd take us in?" Ethan's gut twisted. A part of him wanted to stand up and walk out right then. This wasn't the deal. He'd asked for a wife, not a widow with half a schoolhouse of children. But the way the little ones looked at him, tired, wary, hungry, hit him harder than a fist fight. He remembered being a boy himself, alone after Fever took his parents, scraping by under the mercy of neighbors until he was old enough to ride fence for himself. Sarah must have read his hesitation, because she set her jaw and said, "If you turn us away, I'll understand. But we ain't got nowhere else to go." The room was quiet except for the scrape of forks and the ticking of the big iron clock. Ethan finally blew out a breath. "It's a hard land," he muttered. "Runnin' stock takes sweat and grit. 5 kids ain't easy on a ranch." Sarah met his gaze. "I been workin' since I was 12. I know sweat and grit, and my kids, they're tougher than they look." It was said with such steel that Ethan almost smiled. Almost. Shadows on the horizon by afternoon, Ethan had them loaded into his buckboard wagon. The Carter children clung together on the rough boards, staring wide-eyed at the endless sweep of prairie. Sarah sat stiff beside him, bonnet strings fluttering in the wind. They rode in silence at first, hooves thudding steady against the hard-packed trail. The land stretched out raw and unbroken, sagebrush rolling like waves, distant butts standing like sentinels, vultures wheeling high overhead. It was a long drive to the McGraw place. His ranch lay tucked against the foothills, 50 miles from town, with nothing but wilderness between. Halfway there they stopped at a creek to water the horses. The children splashed their faces, laughing for the first time since stepping off the stage. Sarah watched them, her shoulders easing just a fraction. Ethan stood by the wagon chewing on a piece of grass, and tried not to stare. But he did. There was something about her, something beyond the tired eyes and patched dress. She carried herself like a woman who'd been tested by fire and come out forged stronger. He respected that, even if he hadn't asked for it. The sound of distant hoofbeats broke his thoughts. Ethan stiffened, eyes scanning the ridgeline. A small knot of riders moved against the sky, dark silhouettes, too many to be cowhands, outlaws, he swore under his breath. The Carter boy, the oldest, noticed too. His face went pale. Sarah saw Ethan's hand go to his Colt. Trouble, she asked, voice tight. Could be, he said. Stay close to the wagon. Keep the little ones down. The riders angled away, disappearing into the scrub, but Ethan knew better. Out here gangs watched the roads, picked their moments. A man hauling supplies, or a family with nothing but trunks made for easy pickings. As they climbed back into the wagon, Ethan flicked the reins with a hard snap. The horses surged forward. The wide frontier felt a whole lot narrower with shadows dogging your trail. The ranch in the foothills, by the time they reached the McGraw spread, twilight was painting the sky in strokes of red and violet. The Carter children sat slumped in the wagon bed, too tired to fidget. The ranch came into view as they crested a hill, a wide valley cut with a lazy creek, fenced pastures stretching to the tree line, cattle grazing dark against the grass. The main house was plain but solid, built of timber hauled from the mountains, its porch facing west to catch the sunset. Sarah let out a soft breath. After weeks of road dust and hardship, it looked like heaven. Ethan pulled the wagon up in front of the house and set the brake. Ain't fancy, he muttered, climbing down, but it's held together. The children spilled out, stretching their legs, staring at everything with wide eyes. Sarah stepped down more slowly, taking it all in. Ethan felt a strange tug in his chest, watching her gaze settle on the house. The way her hand brushed the porch rail like she was testing whether it was real. Beds inside, he said awkwardly. Ain't feather mattresses, but better the ground. Sarah smiled faintly. That'll do. A nightfall that night, after supper of beans and cornbread, the Carter children fell asleep huddled together on makeshift pallets in the front room. The fire popped in the hearth, casting shadows across the rough-hewn walls. Ethan stepped out onto the porch, pipe in hand, and let the cool night air fill his lungs. Coyotes yipped in the distance. The stars burned sharp above the black ridges. Behind him, the door creaked open. Sarah stepped out, arms folded against the chill. Thank you, she said simply, for taking us in. Ethan nodded, eyes on the dark horizon. Don't thank me yet. This land don't forgive easy. You'll see. She studied him for a moment, then said softly, Neither do I. For the first time all day, Ethan allowed himself the ghost of a smile. But even as he stood there beside her, he knew trouble wasn't far. Outlaws had been thick as flies that summer, and word was they had a new leader, a ruthless gunman named Jace Burrell, fresh out of Yuma prison. Ethan had tangled with him once before, and if Burrell was still writing these parts, the McGraw ranch and everyone on it was about to be tested harder than ever. The night wind whispered through the cottonwoods. Sarah stood silent beside him, her presence steady as the earth itself, and for the first time in years Ethan McGraw wondered if maybe, just maybe, he wasn't so alone anymore. The McGraw ranch slept under a heavy quilt of silence, broken only by the occasional creak of the timbers and the lowing of cattle in the distance. Moonlight spilled over the valley, painting the fences silver and the creek black as spilled ink, but Ethan McGraw did not sleep. He sat in the chair by the window, shotgun across his knees, eyes fixed on the horizon. Somewhere out there in the dark, trouble was moving. He could feel it in his bones the way old ranchers feel weather coming. Behind him, soft footsteps creaked on the floorboards. Sarah stood in the doorway, her hair unpinned, her figure caught in the pale glow of the firelight. You been up all night? She asked quietly. Ethan nodded once. Ain't right, them riders we saw yesterday. Men like that don't just vanish. Sarah moved closer, her voice low. How bad do you reckon it'll get? Ethan sighed. Depends if they're Burrell's lot. If so, bad enough. Her brow furrowed. You've crossed paths with him before. Years back. He was running cattle north, rustled a dozen head off me. I tracked him, got most back. Left him a scar he's likely still carrying. Ethan's gaze hardened. Men like Burrell don't forget. Sarah said nothing more, but her hand rested lightly on the back of his chair. That small touch, steady as a heartbeat, carried more strength than words. Comes rode at first light. Ethan saddled his stallion, a coal-black Mustang named Jet, and rode out along the fence line. The land stretched wide and lonely, dew glistening on the grass, morning chill biting his face. He found sign quick. Hoofprints where too many riders had crossed the creek, a broken branch, cigar ash. Fresh. When he returned, Sarah was already at work with the children, boiling coffee and stirring cornmeal over the fire. Her oldest boy, Tom, tried to look older than his 12 years as he chopped kindling, but Ethan could see the fear lurking under his brave face. "You ride?" Ethan asked him. Tom nodded eagerly. "Taught me some. You'll learn more," Ethan said gruffly. "Every man on a ranch pulls weight." Sarah gave him a sharp look at the word man, but she said nothing. After breakfast, Ethan hitched the wagon. "We're heading into town. Sheriff needs to know what's prowling these hills." Sarah stiffened. "And if Burrell's gang sees us on the road? Better'n sitting here waiting for 'em," Ethan said. "Besides," he patted the rifle laid across the seat, "I aim to be ready." The ride was long, the road winding through canyons where shadows clung even at midday. Ethan's eyes never stopped scanning the ridges. When the town of Dry Creek finally came into sight, a scatter of buildings, a church spire, the livery stable, and the inevitable saloon, Ethan breathed a little easier. But only a little. A trouble in Dry Creek. Sheriff Holt was a lean, weathered man with a permanent squint, the kind you get from too many years staring across sun-baked plains. He listened as Ethan laid it out, the riders, the tracks, the fear that Burrell was back. Holt scratched his jaw. Burrell's name's been whispered more'n once these past weeks. Couple stage wagons hit, a ranch raided down south. Never thought he'd come back to these parts, though. "I has," Ethan said flatly. "And he won't stop till someone stops him." The sheriff's gaze slid to Sarah, standing with her children close. "You brought a family clear across these roads." Ethan bristled. "Ain't her fault the land's lawless." Holt lifted his palms. "Didn't say it was. Just means you'll need more eyes watching your spread." He looked back at Ethan. "I can't spare deputies. Barely got 2 and one's laid up with a busted leg. Best I can do is warn the ranchers and hope folks band together." Ethan's jaw tightened. He'd been a loner by choice most of his life, but Burrell's shadow was bigger than one man could stand against. Outside, the saloon doors swung wide and a pair of drifters staggered out. Sarah's youngest girl clutched her mother's skirts, eyes wide. Ethan felt heat rise in his chest, anger that this was the world she and her children had been thrown into. As they turned to leave town, a voice drawled from across the street. "Well, I'll be damned. If it ain't McGraw." Ethan froze. Slowly he turned. A knot of riders lounged by the hitch rail, dust-caked, hard-eyed. At their center sat a man in a black hat, his face lean and sharp, a white scar slashing down one cheek. "Jace Burrell." "Didn't figure you'd still be breathing," Burrell called, grinning like a wolf. His hand brushed the butt of his revolver. "Looks like you picked yourself up a family. Mighty dangerous thing, bringing lambs where wolves prowl." The street went quiet. Men melted back into doorways. Women pulled children inside. Even the horses stamped nervously. Sarah's hand gripped Ethan's arm. Ethan said nothing. He just tipped his hat low and guided Sarah and the children back into the wagon. As they rolled away, Burrell's laughter followed like spurs scraping stone. Preparing for the storm back at the ranch, the tension was thick as heat lightning. Ethan set the children to chores, fetching water, stacking wood, anything to keep their hands busy. But his own time was spent differently. He oiled his rifle, checked the stockade gates, made sure the barn doors would bar shut. He rode the perimeter twice, marking weak spots in the fence. Sarah watched him from the porch. "You think they'll come tonight?" Ethan didn't answer. She came closer, voice sharp. "You keep all this locked up inside like silence can hold it back. But I need to know, Ethan. I need to be ready." Finally, he looked at her. The weight in his eyes was heavier than lead. "Yes, they'll come. Burrell don't let grudges cool." Sarah's breath caught. She turned her gaze toward the hills, where thunderheads were gathering. "Then we'll be ready too," she said. The raid night fell heavy, storm clouds blotting out the stars. Wind rattled the shutters, carrying with it the smell of rain and gunpowder. Ethan had the children bedded down in the root cellar, lantern turned low. Sarah stayed by his side, a shotgun in her hands that she held with the sure grip of someone who'd used one before. "Burrell'll come from the east," Ethan muttered, scanning the dark ridge. "Trees give him cover." They didn't have to wait long. The first whoop split the night, followed by the thunder of hooves. Shadows poured down the hillside, half a dozen riders, torches flaring, guns flashing in the dark. Ethan's rifle cracked. One outlaw tumbled from his saddle. The rest spread wide, firing as they came. Bullets sparked off the porch rail, glass shattered. Sarah fired, the shotgun booming, and another rider swerved off screaming. The air stank of smoke and fear. Horses screamed, children cried from the cellar below. Ethan fought like a man possessed, each shot measured, each movement sharp as steel. But Burrell himself was a phantom in the storm, riding close, his laughter cutting through the chaos. "You can't keep what ain't yours, McGraw," he shouted. "This land, this family, you'll lose it all." Lightning split the sky, and in that flash Ethan saw him. White scar blazing, gun leveled. Their shots rang out together. Ethan staggered back, the world tilting. His shoulder burned like fire, but Burrell reeled in the saddle, hat flying, blood streaking down his arm. The gang hesitated, leader wounded. Sarah fired again, fierce as any frontiersman, and the outlaws broke. They wheeled and fled into the storm, curses fading into the distance. Silence fell, broken only by the ragged pant of Ethan's breath. The aftermath rain poured, washing blood and powder from the earth. Sarah bound Ethan's wound with strips torn from her own dress, her hands steady despite the crimson soaking through. "You're a fool," she muttered, though her eyes shone. "A stubborn, reckless fool." Ethan gave a tight smile. "Maybe so. But we're still here." The children crept from the cellar wide-eyed, clinging to Sarah's skirts. Tom looked at Ethan like boys do at men who stand against storms and live. By dawn the ranch still stood, scarred, battered, but standing. Sheriff Holt rode in with a posse, too late for the fight but quick to follow the outlaws' trail. Burrell would live, but he was hurt, his gang scattered. For now the ranch was safe. Ethan sat on the porch, arm bound, Sarah at his side, children dozing against them. The rising sun painted the valley gold, turning smoke into mist. "You didn't sign up for this," Ethan said quietly. Sarah looked out at the horizon, her jaw set, her eyes fierce. "I signed up for survival, for giving my children a chance. Seems to me that's what you've been fighting for too." Their eyes met, steady as a vow. Ethan tipped his hat back, feeling the weight of loneliness he'd carried for years slipping, piece by piece, into the dust. Maybe he hadn't gotten the bride he expected, but he reckoned he'd gotten the one he needed.